Hey guys.
Hi, everyone. Here we are, back in the virtual world. I guess I will start by saying that Rachel Kuntz and I, Courtney Sexton, convened this panel with a couple of our friends and colleagues who are amazing, or who we consider to be amazing literary citizens. And so we would just love to chat with everyone today about what that means. Um, we'll start by doing a little round of introductions, and then we'll get into a discussion, and then we'll finish out the panel by discussing some of the things in the community that we are excited about coming up. So Rach, I'm going to punt it over to you to maybe give a little bit of background about the Inner Loop and who we are.
Sure. I'm Rachel Kuntz. I co-direct the Inner Loop with Courtney. A little bit about me. I've lived in DC since 2007. So I don't want to count how many years that is now. Um, and I write creative nonfiction. I've volunteered at a few different organizations, Rightopia, 826DC, the City of DC Humanities Grant Program, and I run the Inner Loop with Courtney. The Inner Loop is a literary reading series and community for creative writers in the entire DMV and Baltimore. We have several aspects of programming. The reading series is the cornerstone of the organization. We hold that monthly with a established reader as our featured reader, who's often award-winning and well-published, as well as 9 local readers in every genre: nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. And the idea is to get writers from every level of their career together in a room so that they can build community together, as well as with the broader community. All our events are always free and open to the public. We also have writing retreats, a summer residency, a podcast on which we will be talking about this very subject, which will be coming out in a couple weeks. So if you want to hear more, you can hear 3 old friends chatting it up about how great it is to have literature in common. And we just launched our newest program called Author's Corner, which spotlights a local author who's published with a small to medium-sized press, who doesn't have their own publicity budget. And we kind of take that over for them. So we feature them in our reading series on our podcast. We've partnered with Washington Independent Review of Books to get them a guest post on the publication, with Potter's House DC to sell their book and feature it in a special corner in the store. And with our restaurant partners, Shaw's Tavern, Potter's House, the restaurant Revelers Hour, and Pie Shop DC. And we put a little insert with an excerpt from their work in the takeout and menu so that everyday people can just get a little taste of literature, and there's a QR code for them to learn more about us and the author. So that's a super quick rundown of everything we do. And Courtney and I built this organization from the ground up starting in 2014. So we have lots to say about what it's like to build and sustain a literary community.
Thank you, Rach. Can you tell us what your primary writing genre is and your favorite?
Me?
Yeah, uh, your favorite local author, maybe? Is that a weird question?
Is that a weird question?
We all
Oh yeah. I thought we were gonna say who we thought was like an amazing or inspired by a literary citizen.
yeah,
Maybe.
we can
Okay.
we can get to that part.
Oh, is that later?
Yeah.
Jumping again. So I write creative nonfiction. I guess the book that I've read most recently that I was super inspired by was Girlhood by Melissa Febos. I really believe that that book is going to go down in history as, a real representation of what womanhood means in this time, and how the history has flown into this moment and how it will continue to flow. So I really recommend anybody read that.
Awesome. Thank you. Kristen, I am going to turn it over to you, please, to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your engagement with our community.
Awesome. So hi everyone, I'm Kristen Zori King. So I'm a writer based in DC. I've been here since 2016, early 2016. And I'm also a teaching artist. So I'm a writer and a teaching artist. I primarily write, well, gosh, it's hard to say what I primarily write. I started out as a poet. The last few years, I've pretty much exclusively done creative nonfiction until the pandemic, when all of a sudden my brain was like, fiction, flash fiction, that's all we're going to do. So a little bit all over the board, but lately just a lot of fiction. So I'm a writer, teaching artist based in DC. I also run an organization called Moonlit that provides accessible literary programming to the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. And I do a lot of creative consulting and collaboration with local bookstores, organizations, and teaching artists. I think that's all there is about me.
Oh, there's much more, but that's, that's a good intro. Thank you, Kristen. Leah.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I feel like being a literary citizen is now essentially mixed up with the inner loop and all the work that you guys are doing. So really, really excited about that. I have been in DC since 2004, and I have, like many of us, and I'm hoping that Rachel and Courtney talk a little bit about their parallel careers as well. But I worked as an economist and gender specialist at the World Bank for many years, and I try to manage that work with the writing life, and I think of myself as primarily a writer, and then and doing everything else on the side. But the side is very busy, as you can imagine, and I think that it is it is perhaps impossible in the current environment with the pandemic to be a writer that isn't part of a community. It's very depressing if you're not part of a community. It's great for work if you're able to work, but the community is what is the sort of the light in the darkness that pulls you out of your your steady state of eclipse in this current environment. And I really appreciate having these different points of contact. And I think for me, they've been being on the board of the Inner Loop, being on the board of the Shoe Center, which is based out of George Mason University, the Shoes International Center, and working with the Writers Center on curating a number of different programming, most currently with Plume, where I'm a volunteer editor. Plume's an online poetry journal, and I do mostly features and then help curate programming with the Writers Center. And so it gives one an opportunity, being in this sort of editorial space, to touch on some of my own background, which is that I grew up in India and I have a literary community in India. And then I came here, and for a long time I was just working, and family life was, of a new immigrant was just sort of took over my life, so to speak. And so it took a few years to get back into a literary community in the same way as, as I had originally had it in India, and then now have it here. And there was a darkish period in the middle where it was mostly other things, and I'm sure many of you have experienced that. But I guess in terms of writing, I have mostly written fiction and poetry, and had a book out recently, and so it's been really nice to be able to contact all the different places in the immediate DMV, the DC area, to hear and to be heard, I guess. That was a sort of yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we'll touch on other things as we go, but
That's great. Thank you, Leah. it's funny you mentioned the kind of blurring of edges of the multiple parts of your life, and that's definitely something I would love for us to talk more about. Um, I'll give a brief intro of myself. Well, my hands looked really tiny there. That was weird. Um, I am Courtney Sexton. As Rachel mentioned, I'm the co-director of the Inner Loop. That is the most relevant thing to this panel. I first came to DC in 2009. I left for a stint to go to Sarah Lawrence, where I met Rachel, which was an amazing experience. And parts of that were what I think we hoped to translate to our community here in DC, to kind of make that MFA experience one that everyone could share in some ways. But I, like Chris, I think I started out as a poet, and that primary genre has shifted and changed over the years. I'm predominantly a creative nonfiction writer. In the past few years, I've been doing a lot of science writing. I would say that's my primary focus at the moment, although the essays still sneak in here and there. So yeah, in addition to working with the Inner Loop, I collaborate with a variety of other arts organizations around town and small business and local business owners, and curate events and different activities, both for writers and other artists at large here in DC. And a lot of dog stuff. So that's a whole other part of my life. But let's get on with it. That's who we are. Certainly, if anyone has additional questions about any of those things, we are happy to have you contact us. But I think I want to just kick this off by, we talked about, literary citizenship. The title is Literary Citizenship. What does that mean? What is a literary citizen? What, as that entity, what are your responsibilities as a writer, as a member of the community? So if anyone, maybe we can all kind of give a go at trying to parse out a definition there. I'm going to go Kristen on this one.
Okay. I think there's so many ways that you could define a literary citizen, but I think, I was thinking through this question a lot last night, and I was sort of thinking, like, what brought me to writing, what brought me to literature. And I think it was being a reader, and I think it was being a kid in a very small, isolated town, and getting books upon books out of the library and feeling this connection to this kind of elevated sense of self and elevated world outside of me. And so and that, moved into writing and to building communities and things like that. But I think where it really starts is connection and building connection. So whether that means that you're, attending readings and saying to someone like, oh, you read this, you might like this author, or whether that's like building whole reading series like you guys have done. I think it's the connection piece is really the primary part of what being a literary citizen is.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think to that end, showing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like kind of being there, engaging in whatever big and small ways that you can. Leah, additional thoughts on that? Add to this building definition.
I was just remembering, I think that really resonated, Kristen, the idea that, you're a reader and you're listening, and that idea that, and then from that comes the sharing, both to share and to be shared with. And especially when I started out, I had no idea that this is the life that I was going to live. And I recall going to Penn India, to a Penn India, event, and from there, doing other things, having poetry groups and things like that I attended. And part of it is contextualizing other people's work, but also contextualizing some of the masters and the people who've come before us, and not be, working in a vacuum. And it's in some ways like being in an MFA, except it's being done in a more ad hoc personal ways, like your own personal program, becoming a literary citizen, where you are listening and offering feedback and then also giving back. So for people who haven't had an MFA, I think it can be a useful way of feeling like you belong and having a home, because otherwise you are sort of lost on your own. And I think most of the writers that I've read about had some sort of literary community, whether or not they were connecting others in an active way or not. And it might have been very small, like a salon or a small group of people who formed, a lost generation or whatever. So it is nice to feel both that intimacy, which is the immediate sense that you're with other people who understand what you're doing. So it could just be one other person. It doesn't necessarily have to be a larger group. And I think that when you started out talking about people who inspired, I was thinking of Sarah Browning, and she founded Split This Rock and was the director for many years. And she has a really interesting combination of being both leader and mentor. So she doesn't hold back on the feedback in a larger sense that you might need, and also she connects and includes, and I think that's another thing that's really important, which the Inner Loop does, and many good literary organizations that are in the citizenship field, area, they're really expanding the community, and making sure that it's not a group of people who are exclusive.
I think that's a great point, and I think accessibility was another piece I wanted to sort of touch on within being like a literary citizen. So I think like what we've heard so far and what we've identified so far is connection, showing up, sharing, and then there's the like accountability and inclusivity and accessibility piece where you're identifying, part of this work is doing the work both on and off the page. So identifying where are there gaps in the community, in accessibility, in reaching people, in creating these connections and spaces to share, and working to remedy that, which I think Sarah Browning is a great example of someone who's done that very well. And I think DC in general, I've lived across the country and world and been in several different writing communities, and DC is one, as well as Baltimore, I find a community that's consistently pushing forward in a way that I really admire and hope to be a part of.
Yeah, Chris, that's exactly what I was thinking while Leo was speaking, just picking up on what she's saying about like creating a home, and also the idea that Courtney and I sometimes sort of characterize it as bringing the MFA, to something a more accessible thing, because the literary community at large can be very exclusive and especially like monetarily restrictive. Many people can't just stop their lives and grab an MFA real quick. So I really think that just real quick, like, let me just stop working, let alone, pay for many programs. So I think, one of the biggest things that drives us is creating that access, just creating access so that it's there, and you are reaching these communities where the idea of concentrating on art is out of the realm of possibilities normally, because of poverty, because of culture or whatever is getting in the way. Just to reach out and be like, you can focus on your art, you don't have to give up your life, and you can do it as much or as little as you need or want to. And I think that, that's a huge part of being a literary citizen, because that there are so many potential beautiful writers out there who could be contributing to, our experience of life by reading them and to the canon. And you want to help bring them into the community, into the fold of that family that Leah was talking about.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it can happen again, without much planning. But I understand now that having been exposed to this literary community in Washington, starting with Split This Rock, and then seeing how they created access and accessibility, which is a very big part of what they're doing. And but they had to do it through a manifesto of sorts, and it came before Black Lives Matter, and then there was Black Lives Matter, and that's sort of Split This Rock did that maybe 10 years before Black Lives Matter, which was that literary organizations need to have a manifesto. They need to be like any other organization across the US or the world, be thinking very mindfully about what is who constitutes your community, and how do you create sort of a much broader access to people who are outside of that community, who are never going to be a part of it unless you can't just be sort of neutral. And that's similar
Yeah,
with
you have to make that extra effort to reach them.
create, yeah.
Yeah, I think in the same way that we can all be, I'm sorry, Leah, that we all are citizens of the world, or we are citizens of DC, the DMV area. You can just be something, or you can actively be something. And that seems to be the most important part to, I think, what we're all saying. I was jotting down some words as everyone was speaking, and I heard intentional, active, leader, mentor, connection, inclusion, expansion, accessibility, showing up, sharing, accountability, mobilize. I think all of these things are really some of the key elements of what it means to embrace your literary citizenship. And something we all have in common is we are all writers ourselves. I think that you can be a part of the literary community without necessarily being an active writer or considering yourself a writer. But I think and others may have different thoughts, but I think to truly connect, even if you're not, working on your manuscript while you're working on building community, building space, I think you have to know what that feels like in order to see what the opportunities are that people need, in order to see where the gaps are and what they are to be filled. Kristen and Leah, that is why we invited you here to speak with us, because you both have inspired us as we've been on our journey engaging here. Kristen, I've seen you burn the midnight oil at both ends, keeping Moonlit going and offering free and accessible programming. Leah, I can't count the number of times you have said to me, you need to meet so-and-so. Don't you know so-and-so? Let me connect you. And then you actually do. You follow up, you make sure it happens. I think that is a really big thing. It's very easy to say, oh, just go do XYZ. Oh, just go read ABC. But lots of us, especially when, like all of us here, have many things going on in our lives, we need that extra nudge. We need the actual commitment to the action. And that is what I've seen both of you do over and over. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And we've seen you do that too. I mean, just the note too, that like when I was new to DC and I was starting Moonlit and I was like trying to figure out sort of what I was doing, and I knew what I wanted, but I wasn't sure of the full view. Someone said to me, you guys have to connect with Rachel and Courtney, made the introduction, and then you guys grabbed coffee with me and we talked, and it was, I mean, and those things matter too, actually taking those meetings and talking to people and being encouraging and sharing your time, which is something I find so inspiring about just the DC community in general. There's so many generous people willing to share their time and experience.
At Big Bear, I remember that. We went. Well, that's actually a really nice segue to one of our other questions in terms of time and experience, right? So it takes time to get experience, and it also takes time to give it. So there comes a certain point when you're engaging or you're running an organization, and how do you figure out a balance, to uphold your your citizenship?
What do you do when you run out of time? Courtney and I need this advice.
Any tips?
I mean, I will just say when I saw this question, was thinking about it out, my like in my notebook, I just wrote LOL IDK. So yeah, I will let you start.
Leah, I feel like you are an excellent time manager. You've raised some beautiful children. You are a lovely partner. You are a friend, a comrade, a writer. You have a book out, and you're constantly giving. So how do you do it all?
I think that the writing suffers the most in general. Like I think that when I'm trying to be there for in various ways, um, it is the writing that comes last. And I think that for most of us, that can be okay. But as I've said in previous iterations of I think my column, I write a column called "The Company We Keep," and my editor is wonderful because when she tells me, you don't have to do it this edition, you could just skip it, and that's wonderful. But um, it's the writing that really will suffer, and as a result, then I will suffer, and then I will die. That's what I usually say, because there is this for me, and I think that there are literary citizens who probably aren't writers, and they're doing incredible work, and philanthropists across the board have various other careers and lives that they've lived, but if that is your practice, then you have to do it to be satisfied with yourself, no matter how long it is. And I know with Rachel and you, and I'm sure, Kristen, you feel this too, that projects take many years to complete. And but there's always, even when you're working that much and that long, there's always a sense of urgency that it could be today that it's finished, and that you will be finished and you will be out in the world. And that holding that and then realizing that you can't, and then just keeping on going, and that sense of doubt, and managing it, it's very hard. And so the action item is you have to have a folder in your email or wherever, which is you put the requests in the folder, you tell people when you can get back to them, and then you hopefully can somehow respond, because you don't want to be telling someone that you will respond and then never responding. And so in most cases, in some cases, I've actually taken years to respond, but I've said, I can't do it right now. And not years, but months. And in other cases, if the timing is right, I've been able to get through, 10 requests or whatever they are in a short amount of time. But I imagine that, we are not necessarily the only examples here. There's people who are extraordinarily busy and producing an extraordinary amount of work. And I think the question, for someone like Maggie Smith, for example, many books in a short number of years, and then constantly being online. Hannah Greco is another example of someone who produces a lot and is an amazing literary citizen. But how does she do it? I have no idea. And I think that there is some clue there about how you produce your own work, and you stay, and you also tweet 40 times a day and have this huge following on social media. For me, I can't really do that, because the writing is so hard that I have to clear space for it. And I could go the next 20 years without finishing something. Mm-hmm. And I could go my whole life without finishing it. And,
yeah.
So what is important as a writer? And I think that is to finish.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rachel. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I just I was thinking as Leah was talking about filling spaces, kind of like, setting aside that section of your inbox to when you need a break from your writing, and you can fill in those little spaces and without sort of infringing upon your writing. I think and like on a larger scale, I had writer's block for almost a decade. And so within that time is when I created the Inner Loop with Courtney. And then the writer's block broke, you know, like a year ago or 18 months ago or something. And I was just writing, like working on the book, like nonstop. And I didn't want to do anything else. I have a toddler, you know, a family, but I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to see Courtney. I didn't want to see anybody. I just wanted to write. And I feel like you have to honor yourself, the way Leah is talking about your process. Every writer is different, and has a different process. And I'm like Leah, like if I'm writing, I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to touch social media. You know, I don't want anybody to talk to me. I was so annoyed every time, you know, my family came home. But, you know, and that was like, you know, a learning experience in and of itself. But I think for me, like one of the biggest things I wanted to do with the Inner Loop was make it consistent, because I feel because of this, so many writers will start something and then let it trickle away, or it'll be every 2 or 3 months whenever I have the time or feel like it. And I feel like the Inner Loop would be that if you know, if Courtney and I weren't partners,
Yeah,
we didn't have two people in charge of the
totally.
programming, it would just fall apart. Because we are writers, and because, you know, when inspiration strikes, like I don't care if the Inner Loop like dies. I'm writing, you know. But Courtney was there and she picked it up, you know, and Courtney and I always praise each other because we're like water. We just fill in the gaps. Whoever's busy, the other person fills in. And we do it very natural. We're lucky. We do it very naturally. You know, Courtney's working on her dissertation and I'm like, okay, I have to focus on the Inner Loop. You know, so I think in an ideal world, like I would dedicate 10 hours a week to the Inner Loop, and make that time sacred the way I make writing sacred. And maybe I will achieve that going forward. And maybe people like Hannah Greco, like manage their time that way. But for me, like having a partner, having people that I can lean on, to help me engage in the community, even when I'm writing, has been, I don't know, key to success.
Yeah, I think sort of one thing that I've heard from both of you that I really want to underline is being honest about your capacity with yourself, and not what you want your capacity to be, but what it is. And then making sort of thoughtful, meaningful, and joyful decisions towards that knowledge. It's great to say I'm going to do XYZ, but if you only have time to do X and Y, that's just going to create stress for you and dissatisfaction with whoever you're working with. So I think, you know, I mean, if there are any silver linings of the last 18 months and of COVID, I think a lot of folks have realized how exhausted and drained they were, and how, whether it was their creative activities, their work, whatever it was not bringing joy and fulfillment, and have made decisions to instead sort of start moving back towards that and being more mindful about their time and what they're giving. And I've done that very much in the last 18 months. I really had to make some decisions to say no to things that normally I would have, but I just didn't. I no longer was able to be exhausted all the time. And unfortunately, that does mean sometimes saying no to things that are really cool or that you really want to do. But again, then it comes back to the connection of, well, that's not something I could do, but hey, I know these 2 other groups or these 3 other people that might be a great fit for this, so that this can still go out into the world. And, you know, and kind of taking the ego out of it and the micromanaging out of it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That goes into like how to say yes while saying no. I think idea that we wanted to explore, because you know, if you don't have time, and I feel like that's the biggest writerly muscle, as Chris was saying, to learn, and I know Leah's really good at this, is knowing when you have time and knowing when you don't have time, and just being honest both with yourself and the people you're talking to. You know, no, I don't have time to, you know, help you with that, but here's a person who can help you, or here's a time when I could do it. And I think doing that is a way of saying yes when you need to say no, just like not right now, or not me, but this person can help you with that. And the other thing is speaking of COVID and the Zoom world that we're in, so many writers are able to say yes now to things that they would have had to say no to. And I was gonna mention Rihanna Amaklar Scott, because everything we've ever asked him, he's always said yes, and I'm shocked by that because he's sort of, it was when we were asking him all these things, he was on fire. He was in the middle of his success, you know, but he just said yes to everything, and that was even before the Zoom world. And now that we can just call in from our living room, it's so much easier to take part in everything. And I think, you know, getting back to the core of what this panel is about, how it benefits you, you know, the more you can do, the more fulfillment you have, because, you know, we're not rock stars or actors and actresses. We're not famous directors. Like, people don't scream when we walk through the room.
What? I hear those
So
things all the time.
getting an audience is the only moment that we get to feel, you know, that spark of joy of connecting with the audience. Like, our art is on a page, you know, so when people connect with it, we're not there. We don't get to feel it with them, you know, we have to imagine it most of the time. But then there are these events, right, where people can tell you how much your work means to you, to them. And you can, if you're reading from it or you're doing panels like this, you know, you can get that feeling of like, oh, I have like accomplished things. And that's such a good feeling. And being able to say yes to everything, and going to all these events, it's so fulfilling. It really does. um you know, as Leah is always saying, like, that's the, she doesn't say this, that's the juice. Like, that's, you know, that's the good stuff. That's, you know, what we're all doing it for, is to get that feeling of accomplishment and connection, and feeling part of a community. I don't know.
Can I just say off of that really quick? I've done this as an organizer for the last few years, but also as a writer. And I would give this tip to any writer, organizer, person working in the arts, whatever. And I took it from a friend who's also a writer. I have a folder in my email that's just called nice things. And it's nice things that people have said after they've taken a workshop with me or attended an event or even read something and been like, this is great. And there are definite times when I'm feeling really isolated, when I'm feeling like disconnected from myself, my writing, the community, etc., that I can go in and be like, oh, this person actually got a poem from my workshop and are submitting it and are so excited, and that's awesome. And I think in that sense, like, celebrating those things and realizing that it's, you know, it's not always going to be highs, there's going to be levels of exhaustion and stress, and giving yourself reminders during those time periods.
The pro tip to everyone: create a nice.
I know, Courtney, we need to make that folder.
I wanted to add too, and this goes back. Goodness, I lost my train of thought a couple of minutes ago. But this idea of, I think it's a little bit more along the lines of time management, but knowing that your role as a literary citizen is going to change over the course of time, both throughout your life and throughout your writing life, which often merge. And I would love for us to be able, this is going so fast, it's blowing my mind. I would love for us to each be able to go around and talk about, you know, one or two specific things that we've gained through our citizenship. And for me, I think that would be continuing to feel inspired and to be around such an incredible community, even when my writing isn't my primary focus. So for years, and I think Rachel hinted at this too, for years, the inner loop was my writing life. And I wasn't necessarily, you know, I was doing little things here or there, but I wouldn't walk up to people and say, oh, I'm a writer with confidence the way that I do now. But helping to build community, helping to bring people together, and seeing their successes, seeing them come back and say nice things, really gave me that high that I was thinking, or that I was seeking out of creativity. So that is I guess maybe as Rach and I talk about a little bit of one of the intangible benefits that you don't think, but Leah, maybe you could tell us what some benefits of literary citizenship are for you.
So I was actually thinking about what Rachel said about the writer's block, and and part of the community relationship is that the analogy I'm thinking of now is that writing a piece of work, sometimes takes 20 years for the best of us when it's a longer piece of work, and it involves climbing a mountain almost. You're going up this mountain, and it's probably the highest mountain you'll ever climb. And then when you get right to the top with your friends and community alongside you, with the inspiration as you're going, you're not necessarily writing. The work has not even begun in a sense. You're getting to the top of the mountain. And then you have to jump off the mountain, and you have to jump into this piece of water that's really far down there, and maybe 28,000 feet below you, and you're jumping off. And
do you have a parachute or anything, or is this just
deep down, and then your toddler is knocking at your door and saying, "Mom, could I have blah blah blah?" And
oh my God, yes.
and there you are. You finally jumped off the cliff, and you're deep in your work, and you're being asked to stop and triage.
Oh my God, yes.
5 or 6 things, and then we have losses. We have so many things that go on simultaneously, and I guess that that idea of what you're saying about the inspiration, Courtney, that you've got these people around you that you're sort of spending time with, whether in books, with the reading, like Kristen said, when you start out, or these people that you're seeing, and you go to events and you're inspired, and it's not really a block. Climbing the mountain is not writer's block necessarily. It's people have used other analogies about fallow fields and all of that, but those are much more gentle and maybe desert-like in some ways, but really, I mean, it's such a long journey, and then often you have to go back and start climbing the mountain again, because you're not finished once you jump off. And there's a whole range of mountains, and they're all taller, and you need to get to the top to be able to see. And so you keep going and going and going, and it never ends. And so I think that who we'd like to have along the way is not necessarily just for our benefit, because in a way we're sort of hoping that we'll be breaking new ground in some ways, leaving something behind, not just being on a solitary journey. And a friend of mine said that for every friend, you're not a good friend if you just keep your friends to yourself. You're a good friend if you introduce your friends to each other, and the friendships grow and the community grows. And there's this sense, I think, with what you're doing with bringing 1,000 writers in over the years, you're building friendships, and you're building this ecosystem. And none of us can do it by ourselves and say, oh, that's what I did, that's me, the ego of it. We can't. And so it's really about that collaboration, and recognizing what people are good at. Like Rachel, you're really good at radio, and it's an amazing, you built amazing radio podcast with Courtney, and it's quirky and substantial. And through the quarantine, you all did some amazing work, and not everyone would know how to do that and do it well.
Thank you. Yeah, Rach is the maven there. Kristen, I want to be mindful of your time, because I know you need to leave us in a few minutes, but I would love to hear about some of the benefits, tangible or intangible, that you've seen, and also maybe 1 or 2 things you're excited about coming up on the horizon.
Sure. Yeah. So speaking of literary citizenship, I'm curating a series of free workshops for Many Languages, One Voice. Highlights voices from DC immigrants and those who have been working on the front lines of the pandemic. And I have a class at 10 that I have to jump for. But I would say, I think to all of the points here today, I think literary citizenship is really an ecosystem, and your role in it will kind of ebb and flow. And sometimes that means you're, you know, doing action items and the director, et cetera. Sometimes it means you're the participant. Sometimes it means you're the connector. Sometimes you're somewhere in between. But recognizing those shifts, I think, can be really powerful. And what being a part of the community has been for me is, I think, similar to what you said, Courtney, is I've gotten a lot more validation in my creative self, and understanding that I am a creative person, and I can insert creativity into everything that I do, and really finding that validation that that's the right thing for me to do, and brings me a lot of joy. But I think the other thing I would say more intangible is it has brought me that sense of connection that I had when I was a kid in the library in a small town in upstate New York, where, you know, I would see, I don't know, like a beam of light coming through the window and be like, I feel this inexplicable sadness. And then I would read a book that explained that and would make me understand that other people feel whatever that weird small emotion is. And it's like that kind of like connection to the heart in real life, which has been really wonderful to make those connections and be like, there's more people that also love to read and write and connect in this way. So that's been really wonderful. And I guess just some things, I mean, there's so much that I'm looking forward to moving forward, but one thing that's I guess a little more vague is and we touched on sort of, is that I've been so thrilled with the way that arts programming in general during the pandemic has really shifted and adapted to understand that the way that things were is not necessarily how we need to do them moving forward in this virtual world, and events have become more accessible. They've, you know, really adapted to the needs of both organizers and participants. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how the literary scene in particular, but just the arts world in general, continues to adapt and create, you know, connecting, accessible spaces.
Yeah, likewise. Kristen, where can people find you? Where can they participate in your programs?
Yeah, sure. So Moonlit has a number of events coming up this winter. I've taken a bit of a break to focus on my own writing. So you can find Moonlit programming at moonlitdc.com. Workshops I'm teaching or writing at kristenzoriking.com. And I'm on Twitter at kristenzoriking and Instagram at heykck. So I look forward to connecting.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, good luck today with the workshop. Yeah. So we still have a few more minutes and definitely a million more things we could continue talking about. I think maybe, Rach, I was thinking maybe we could touch on some of those kind of like real gains that we've received in holding our citizenship cards. You know, we've talked a lot about inspiration and community and connection and the feels between people, but I have to say also, I mean, like, participating, people notice when you participate, and they are willing to invest in you when they see that you're doing that, right? So I just recently got a freelance gig because someone said, "Oh, you were one of the Interloop people? Come on over." And I, like, you know, 7 years ago would never ever have imagined that that would be a thing that came out of this group we were exploring for, you know, fun, right?
Yeah, I think similarly, Courtney and I always talk about this, like the interloop being a selfish endeavor. But just to expand on that, like we started it because we wanted community. We wanted access to local writers, regardless of, you know, school affiliation or level. It's something we wanted, and so we got that sort of daily reward of just being in touch with writers, you know, that we've kind of been talking about for the past hour. All of the feels, all the good feelings, you know, and Courtney and I have made really meaningful relationships, like with Leah, and our friend Dan. And, these are some of our best friends now. And to have a friend that you connect with over writing is truly magical. And so those are all of the, benefits you get along the way. The whole time Courtney and I were doing it, we thought we're getting out of this what we wanted, like, and that's what kept us going. But like Courtney said, then you get surprised with these lovely, tangible benefits. I realize when I come out with my book, like I have a family of writers who are like ready and waiting to like buy it and support me, and attend the launch. And that's super exciting to me, realizing that it's like, it really is a family. And I feel, people have pointed out, you've been supporting writers all this time. Like, I kind of thought like, oh no, I got to start supporting writers. Oh yeah, I do it anyway. This is what I've been doing the whole time. So, it might feel insurmountable, but actually it's just been sort of like second nature, to provide that support, and to celebrate other writers, because we all do love like writing and literature and reading. And so it's actually quite easy to support other writers, and then you get the magic of being supported in return, with these surprise opportunities. But also when you get your moment, everybody's gonna attend and be ready to support you back. So that's pretty magical.
Oh, amen to that. Again, this goes back to this question. I don't know. I keeps swirling in my head of, like, can we separate these things? Is our literary citizenship dependent on just being human and by nature being writers? And I feel like, Leah, this is something I think about when I think about you, because I met you through our writing community. That's how we came to each other. But I also find in you a kindred spirit who is so different from me in so many ways, but who, I don't know, we just have some weird commonality of we soul knowing this like weird thing. And is that because of this more, I don't know, nebulous kind of citizenship that we share, regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of our status, regardless of where we're from, who we engage with, or who we did prior to meeting? I don't know.
I was wondering about your work actually with respect to that, like the idea of like how dogs connect with one another, and you both have dogs, of course, and then you work with dogs, but that sense of like pack of like, I feel like, you kind of sniff people and you're like, oh, this person, I really like them.
And I sniff your butt, Leah.
No connection can be. You said you wanted some humor, so now I'm thinking about the dogs coming together, sniffing each other. It's like a dog bark, right? Where we're all sort of, this is nice. I like it. This dog's gonna be my friend.
I will say it's like pretty amazing to have writing in common with people, because when I socialize with non-writers, there's plenty of things we could talk about, other mothers, we could talk about having a toddler, people who live in the area, we could talk about the community, like the physical community. But so often when you try to convey to a non-writer the mountain Leah was describing and the diving and just the heartache that you go, it's just impossible to convey. Like when I, had my July 4th celebrations with some old friends, and I was like, I finished my book, and they're like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, you don't understand. It's life changing. So yeah, I mean, it's really, something, again, back to intangible rather than tangible, of having writers as friends. You have that deep connection that no matter what kind of personalities you have or whatever, you always have that in common. I mean, we tell our audience that every time when we're like, talk to each other. It's easy. You all have writing in common. And, having the thing that you adore, that you dedicate your life to, in common with somebody is, I don't know. What's a good word for that? Come on, writers.
Can't put, you can't put a price on it.
I think with what's happened in the last couple of years, on a cultural level, there's a lot of questions about who gets to be a part of a community and who do you make an effort to include, and so on. And I think that there's so many power dynamics at play, and so to rest those power dynamics to some degree is really useful for people to feel like, okay, this is going to be the space I'm going to read for the first time. There's a lot of people who you see in their bios reading for the first time, and spaces that allow for that combination of and actively curating that and thinking about the opportunity that to listen to the cultural and to listen for the accessibility is very, it's the gains are not tangible at all, but it is so essential. And I think a lot of literary organizations are trying to do it. And I think that's perhaps one of the most important things to keep in mind. And also the fact that there is this beltway, just in general, like we're the inner loop. And you brought writers in, Vijay Sheshadri and others, and from outside of the loop. But the physical barriers that exist within a city that is rapidly gentrifying, and that whole piece of it, of how a literary organization has to somehow think actively about bringing these organizations, bringing us to the spot, going everywhere. You can't be everywhere, but the decentralizing, the bringing the community to each other from very different parts of the city. That physical piece is, I think, critical.
Yeah, Leah, I agree. And I think to that end, also elevating those writers in our community, like part of our citizenship duty is elevating those writers in our community whose voices, need to be amplified or could be inspiration for others. And Rach, you mentioned Rian. I'm thinking of Rian and Ethelbert and Tope, who's going to be joining us next week, especially some of the Black writers in our community, especially in DC, right? Where, there was a culture of writing here for a long time that that I think those are the people that we should be putting up on pedestals, especially now, so that others can see, everyone is part of this community and everyone has a voice in it. So I think those are definitely among the duties that we have. And I think I'll end there. We're getting our time limit. I can't believe this has gone so quickly. Leah, thank you so much for joining us. Rach, I know we're excited for everyone. What day is it? Tuesday, the 20th is our next event at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom. You can find out more at theinnerlooplit.org. Leah, where can people find?
leahmethod.com. Just be easy.
And we also, as we mentioned throughout the conversation, we have a podcast, the Interloop Radio, and the next episode is going to be all about writerly friends. So if you want to hear more and hear some silly banter between three friends, you should tune in. We're available on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I glitched out for a minute there.
You're back.
Leah, thank you so much.
Thank you. What a great way to start my Saturday.
Agreed.